Good morning or afternoon now, everyone. My name is Julia Berg, and I am coming to you today from the beautiful Foss Waterway Seaport in Tacoma, Washington. So if you have not been here before, here is what the building looks like. We are on the Thea Foss Waterway, and I am so excited to have with us today Megan Churchwell. She is doing a program called Beyond Rosie the Riveter, a history of women in the Navy. And Megan is a curator of the Puget Sound Navy Museum. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her in. Good afternoon, Megan. Thank you so much.
Hey.
So we are so excited for your presentation today. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring that in for you. So please go ahead and type your questions in the comments. This is being broadcast in multiple places on Facebook and YouTube, or you can also email them to education@fosswaterwayseaport.org, and we will go ahead and take your questions at the end. All right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Here is your presentation. And I am looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks so much. So thanks to you all for joining me here today. Again, my name is Megan, and I'm the curator of the Puget Sound Navy Museum, which is over in Bremerton, Washington. And today I'm here to share a bit about the history of women in the Navy, with a focus on the women who have served and who continue to serve locally in the Pacific Northwest. Now, since we're right next to Puget Sound's Naval Shipyard, a lot of my talk today will look at some of the women who have served there over the years. Now, when you picture women and Navy work, you probably think of Rosie the Riveter, which was a term popularized during World War II. But today we're going to start our journey a bit further back in time. So women have actually served in defense of our nation since all the way back in the Revolutionary War. Now, back then, they served in traditionally feminine roles with the Army, like nurses and seamstresses and cooks. And many military posts really counted on these women to make service members' lives tolerable. They often traveled with the military, but unlike the men, they were not officially enlisted in the Army. And most women associated with the Navy during this early era were nurses. And the year 1811 saw the first female nurses included among personnel at Navy hospitals. And in 1862, women served aboard the Navy's first hospital ship, USS Red Rover, to provide medical care for Union soldiers during the Civil War. Now, some women opted for a different path towards Navy service. Even as early as the Revolutionary War, some women chose to forgo traditional gender roles by serving in combat alongside their husbands, or even serving well disguised as men. However, through the 19th century, women were still not an officially recognized part of the Navy. This would finally start to change when women officially became a part of the naval service in 1908. Now, that's when Congress established the Navy Nurse Corps. The first 20 nurses were called the Sacred 20, and they're recognized as the very first women to officially serve in the Navy. They broke the barriers that eventually would pave the way for all women to officially enter naval service. Now, these first Navy nurses worked in the Naval Medical School Hospital over in Washington, D.C., and for a few months in 1913, Navy nurses saw their first official shipboard duty when they were stationed aboard the transport ships USS Mayflower and USS Dolphin. Now, this nurse corps would expand to 160 nurses on the eve of World War I. And pictured here are some Navy nurses working here in Bremerton in 1918. We don't know the circumstances of this photo, but it was probably taken during efforts to document their work during that year's Spanish influenza epidemic. Now, these nurses remained the only women who were officially serving in the Navy until World War I, when the Navy's first enlisted women, known as yeomanettes, joined the service. In March of 1917, the Navy officially authorized the enlistment of women through the Naval Reserve Act. It allowed for the enlistment of qualified persons for service, deliberately without mention of gender. Now, this was deliberate because it was meant to help alleviate a projected shortage of workers in the Navy's shore-based offices as World War I began. As the men who normally filled those office duties went off to war, women were needed to fulfill those roles. Now, shown here is Loretta Walsh of Pennsylvania, who became the very first woman to enlist under this act. And by the time war with Germany was officially declared just 2 weeks later, more than 200 women had already joined her. Now, these women became known as yeomanettes, or yeoman F, to distinguish them from their male counterparts. And there were certainly many structural attempts to separate the men and women in naval service, but men and women in the same rank earned equal pay, which was a rarity in the civilian sector at that time. Now, at the start, it was assumed that these yeomanettes would just perform office duties, but the need for workers was so great during the war that these women also ended up working as mechanics, as truck drivers, as camouflage designers, cryptographers, telephone operators, translators, munitions workers, and much more. Now, this first introduction of women to the Navy did cause some logistical challenges. For instance, the standard Navy uniform was, of course, tailored to men, and the Navy really had no plan in place to supply women's clothing. And of course, at the time, it would still be considered improper for women to wear anything but a dress or a skirt. So quickly, they had to figure out what these enlisted women would wear. And eventually, the Navy settled on the uniform you see here, a single-breasted jacket and a skirt with a hem that was 4 inches above the ankle. Many of the women also adopted a wide-brimmed hat that you'll see in many photos of that period. Their uniforms also included gloves and handkerchiefs, a sign of the times. And most of these yeomanettes were stationed in Washington, D.C. Others found themselves in France, Guam, and Hawaii, amongst many other locations. And locally, there were about 200 yeomanettes who were stationed at Bremerton's Puget Sound Navy Yard, along with other 6,500 other employees, some of whom were also women who'd been hired into civil service positions, which meant they worked for the Navy, but not as enlisted members of the military. They worked in offices as administrative assistants, in the shops operating machinery, sewing in the sail loft, and in the docks as rivet heaters and passers. And when discharged at the end of the war, many of the yeomanettes were converted to civil service positions there. Pictured in the top image, second from the right, is Gertrude McGowan Madden. She enlisted as a yeomanette as soon as she turned 18. And during the war, she was in Bremerton, serving as a secretary to the chief draftsman. And you can see her uniform on display in our museum's first floor gallery. And in this image, she's pictured with fellow yeomanettes. The bottom image is also yeomanettes at the Puget Sound Navy Yard. It was taken by a local photographer, John Steen, and his future wife was one of the yeomanettes who was stationed in Bremerton. Our exhibit of his World War I era photos is now on display in the museum. You can also find a digital version of that exhibit on our website. Now again, in addition to these enlisted women, known as yeomanettes, there were also women who had started working for the Navy in civil service positions. In industrial locations, like the Puget Sound Navy Yard, skirts were, of course, a problem. So some of the women working here wore more practical pants for the very first time. Though, as you can see in this image, some of them were still lacking comfortable shoes for their newfound lives as industrial workers. As the labor shortage became increasingly serious, women like the shipyard workers pictured here began filling more and more non-traditional positions. Now, I couldn't talk about local Navy women without mentioning this famous photo. It was taken just after World War I in May of 1919, and it features rivet heaters and passers at the Navy Yard. It's one of my very favorite photos from our collection. Now, not all of the women who worked with the Navy during World War I did so in an industrial capacity. Another role for women during both World Wars was in the recruitment process. Women played an essential role in recruitment. They were both recruitment agents and advertising subjects. Now, although World War I recruitment posters were usually aimed at getting men to enlist, sometimes they encouraged women too. Bernice Smith Tongate was the subject of the advertisement on the left. She herself enlisted as a yeomanette just 10 days after she posed for the poster artist. She served in both World Wars, and she died at the age of 92 in Kitsap County. Now, upon the end of World War I in November of 1918, there were more than 11,000 yeomanettes serving with the Navy. But within the following 2 years, every woman in the Navy was released from active duty. Now, given the time period, many Americans had considered the use of female employees and female recruits to be a necessary but temporary wartime measure. Women were seen as fulfilling their patriotic duty by releasing desk-bound men for combat, but they were expected to return to more traditional roles when the men came home. But despite this expectation, many women continued on at the Puget Sound Navy Yard in civilian roles. Shown here is Dina Olson, who was hired at the shipyard in 1905. Hers is one of my very favorite stories of local Navy women. In this image, she is making gunpowder bags from gray silk in 1919. But before coming to the shipyard, this Norwegian immigrant made tents and sleeping bags for prospectors during the Klondike Gold Rush. And in 1905, when she started working as a sail loft worker, she was one of the very first women employed at the Naval Shipyard. She was also one of the very first women to retire from any U.S. Navy shipyard when she stepped down in 1925. Although enlisted women would disappear from the Navy until the next World War, the social impact of the yeomanettes certainly went beyond just temporarily replacing men in shipyards. Their service certainly assisted in the passing of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, and their service also paved the way for women to serve in the Navy again during World War II. World War II would, of course, dramatically change the face of America's workforce. As husbands, sons, and brothers left for military duty, wives, daughters, and sisters would take their places in factories and other industrial settings. Building on the precedent set by World War I, women entered the shipyard by the hundreds as both civilians and as enlisted personnel. Again, with many civilian jobs vacated by men heading off to war, many women would perform jobs that were previously reserved only for men, like mechanics, chemists, welders, and electricians. A woman who worked in the defense industry came to be known as Rosie the Riveter, which actually is a term that comes from a 1942 hit song of the same name. And this time around, the Navy organized to recruit women into a separate women's auxiliary rather than including women in the regular Navy. In July of 1942, President Roosevelt signed a law to create the Navy's Women's Reserve Program. And this paved the way for female officers and enlisted women to enter the Navy. These women would become known as Women Appointed for Voluntary Emergency Service, or WAVES for short. And they served in various positions across the United States. And as it has been during World War I, the addition of women to the Navy was expected to alleviate anticipated shortages in shore-based offices. Like the enlistment of yeomanettes, it was seen as a necessary but temporary wartime measure. But by 1945, women made up 18% of all the naval personnel on shore duty, performing almost every kind of onshore job. Now, unlike the yeomanettes of World War I, waves could serve as commissioned officers. But though the waves were given greater privileges than the earlier yeomanettes, there were still significant limitations on their service. They could not serve overseas. They were not permitted to give orders to men, and they could not rise beyond the rank of lieutenant commander. But this time around, the Navy was a bit more prepared for the addition of women to its forces. Waves were given a uniform allowance, which covered the uniform you see here, along with a hat and a handbag. As one Waves recruitment poster exclaimed, "It's a proud moment when you first step out in brand new Navy blues." There were about 250 Waves, including 30 officers, stationed here in Bremerton during World War II, just some of the more than 86,000 on duty nationwide by the end of the war. And like in the First World War, they were joined at the shipyard by thousands of additional women who were serving in a civilian capacity. By 1944, women made up more than a quarter of the workforce at the Navy Yard. And the Waves, as well as their civil service counterparts, proved that women could fulfill these industrial occupations, and they helped pave the way for the full integration of women into both the workforce and the Navy. Now, while women served by thousands in both world wars, it wasn't until 1948 that the need for women in the peacetime armed forces was officially recognized. That year, President Truman signed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act. This act did away with the Waves, while also making it possible for women to enter the regular U.S. Navy in regular or reserve status. In October of 1948, the first 8 women, pictured here, were commissioned in the regular U.S. Navy. Opportunities for women in the active duty Navy began to expand during the Cold War era, but there were still plenty of rules restricting their service. For example, they couldn't serve on board ships, only on shore duty. And into the 1960s, there was a ceiling on promotions, which kept women out of the flag ranks. This was finally dropped in 1967, when women achieved the opportunity for promotion to admiral. And Aline Dirk, shown here, became the Navy's first female admiral in 1972. Major changes occurred for Navy women in the 1970s. During the 70s, women started to enter the surface warfare and naval aviation fields, and they gained access to ROTC officer training programs that were previously open only to men. The Naval Academy first accepted women in 1976 and commissioned its first 55 female graduates in 1980. In 1978, a court case found the rule banning women from shipboard duty to be unconstitutional. And so finally, women were assigned on duty on board support and non-combatant ships for the first time starting in 1978. In 1990, Lieutenant Commander Darlene Iskra, shown in the top left image here, became the first Navy woman to command a ship when she was assigned to USS Opportune. During her career, she was a groundbreaker for women in the Navy. After enlisting in 1979, she became one of the first female Navy diving officers, and among the first women to qualify as a surface warfare officer. She retired from the Navy in the year 2000 and now lives in Kitsap County. Now, mirroring their active duty counterparts, women in the civil service found increasing opportunities throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s as well. And not just as temporary emergency workers, but increasingly as respected workers and professionals. Since 1973, the shipyard has seen a yearly increase in the number of women making careers in both the trades and in professional positions. Programs like the Federal Women's Program, which started at the Shipyard in 1975, advocate for the equal treatment of female employees. By 1985, there were more than 1,700 women working at the shipyard, finding positions in nearly all occupations. During the first Gulf War, women constituted about 15% of the naval personnel fighting in Iraq and Kuwait. In 1994, the repeal of the Combat Exclusion Law expanded the number of assignments that were available to women in the Navy. Women could now serve on combatant ships for the first time, though they were still excluded from submarine service and from units whose primary mission was to engage in direct combat on the ground. In 2010, finally, the Navy announced that women would be allowed to serve on board submarines for the first time. And the first group of U.S. female submariners completed nuclear power school, earned their dolphins, or submarine qualifications, and officially reported on board their submarines in November of 2011. And some of the very first female sailors to qualify in submarines have done so on the submarines homeported right here in Washington State. In late 2015, all combat jobs were finally open to women. In the Navy, women are currently eligible to serve in all ratings or job classifications. And today, every naval community is open to women. Female sailors continue to excel in naval duties both ashore and afloat. There are more than 54,000 active duty women and more than 10,000 female reservists currently serving in the Navy. Today, women serve in every rank from seaman to admiral and in every job from naval aviator to deep sea diver. They serve on ships, in submarines, and ashore. They include Captain Diana Wolfson in the lower right corner here, who recently completed her tour as the head of the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, which made her the first female leader of any U.S. Navy shipyard. And while the first women working with the Navy did so in traditional occupations like nurses and secretaries, today's women hold a variety of positions in nearly every job classification, level, trade, and rating, in both civil service positions and in the U.S. Navy's active duty ranks. Women currently make up about 25% of the U.S. Navy and of the workforce at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. Now, though today women still remain a minority at the shipyard and in the military, their numbers continue to grow. Women's transition into the workplace and into the military was far from easy. But their courage, strength, and determination have paved the way for future generations of women. And today, the opportunities for women to serve and to achieve leadership positions within the Navy have never been greater. And so today I want to take a moment to thank all of the Navy's women, past and present, for their service. Thanks again for tuning in this afternoon. Now, this is normally the time when I invite you all to visit my museum to learn more about local Navy history. Though we do remain closed due to COVID-19, we do hope to reopen soon. And I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have about Navy history or about today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know I learned a lot. Here's a comment coming in saying thank you. I had quite a few questions that you answered already. I was wondering, do you know what is the percentage of women currently serving on submarines?
I don't know on submarines specifically, since it is a community that just recently opened to women.
Right.
I think it's probably lower than the Navy as a whole, but I don't have those numbers.
Yeah, because I used to live in Guam and, of course, lots of submarines there. And so I was surprised to learn that women were serving on submarines. I didn't actually know that. So thank you for that. Now, I have another question that's kind of random, but Manette, the name of the Manette in Bremerton, is that a coincidence with the yeomanettes? Is it just?
I think it is. Manette in Bremerton actually predates the yeomanettes.
Yeomanettes, yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, I wonder if that's related somehow. So yeah, I've not seen any other questions coming in right now, but if you do have them, you can leave them here in the comments on Facebook and YouTube, and Megan will be able to see that. So I'll go ahead and put your presentation away now. So thank you so much. This was really amazing. And I also want to echo your sentiments of thanking everyone, all of our service members for their service. Here is a question. Do we have any anticipation of the museum reopening?
We don't have a date yet, but we're really hoping to reopen soon.
Yeah, that's, everybody has to be careful. The Foss Waterway Seaport has announced that we will be reopening June 3rd to the public, and some of the other museums in Tacoma have already reopened. So we're all really excited about that. And I think we will let everyone get on with their lunch. So thank you so much. And please join us next month as well. We are going to be following with the City of Tacoma Heritage Month and its Mysteries of Tacoma. So we're going to be talking about some of the mysteries that we've learned about, including the Missing Seven, which is a story about 7 young people that got on a boat in the early 70s, disappeared. It was a Catalina 22. No trace of the boat or the people have ever been found. So that's something that we've been looking into recently with the help of Bob Mester. So thank you so much, Megan. I look forward to meeting you in person someday when everything reopens. And I really enjoyed this presentation. So we'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.